You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name is Trent Fleskens, your host as always. This week we're having a chat with another industry leader, someone who's been in the podcast pretty much 2 years ago now to talk about the Northern Beaches, and we're going to hone down into his absolute heartland of Iluka and Currambine today. It's Jay Dash from Noble Avenue. How you going, mate?
Good, thanks, Trent. How are you?
Yeah, very good. It's crazy to think it's been 2 years already.
It has.
But when we listened back to that podcast, episode 294, we nearly fell off our chair when we were listening to some of the prices.
I think you saw my face when I was listening to some of the figures back then.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that today. As an update for everyone in the industry, we're in those mid to high 6,000s now in terms of stock on market. It is rising about 150 properties on average per week. And the reason for that, as I said before, is not because there's more sellers on the market. There certainly aren't. There's less buyers. There's just less transactions going on, and therefore, if you have a constant number of properties coming on and less people taking them off every week, that stock on market number is going to keep creeping, which is happening right now. So we've just ticked over half of a balanced market, and that trajectory at the moment is moving closer towards a balanced market. We expect it to continue to do that until most likely November, December this year, where again, agents will go on holidays, sellers won't bring their properties to market, and transactions will probably stay pretty similar, which the bleeding will probably slow down at that point in time. But in the meantime, winter, spring selling season, it's a time to buy. If you're a buyer out there, this is the best time you could have been buying in the last couple of years. Jay,
yes.
Luke, what an experience it's had over the last couple of years. How's that median house price been travelling?
I think when we were listening to it last time, we were saying it was 1.23 was what I said, and now it's in the 1.7s.
Yeah.
So 500 grand.
For the same product,
For the same product.
And what is that product?
1.7 now is that single story, maybe a renovated kitchen.
Big, beautiful home. Most of them are, right?
Most of them are. This 1.7 now is probably getting you something that's a single story on the east side of Delgado, which is what I said last time.
Yep.
Currambine is still doing well, but the number of transactions obviously have dropped across the board as it has. I think before I said, when I was listening to that, you could get into Currambine for around 800 for something that needs work. Now it's probably close to $1 million or around that mid-nines for a very similar product. But there was a point a few months ago where they were selling for 1.3, 1.4.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that's because of the neighbouring suburbs, because they were getting priced out of that, so they're coming over.
There's so much to unpack in that. The first question I want to ask is, we know that there's been a softening of dynamic of demand versus supply across the whole of the country, and let alone Perth. We're still seeing marginal growth numbers in Perth coming out of the data. What's the difference in experience you're having between an Iluka, which is a premium suburb in the circular area that you're in, and the Currambine, which is on the lower side of it?
It depends on the product. So I think in both suburbs, they've got what I call products that people are upgrading to. So affluent sort of homes. Now, the numbers have definitely dropped across the board in home opens as well. If I was putting something in Currambine that was in the market for around mid-ones, which is getting to that top end of Currambine, I would still see about 30 to 40 groups. Now I'm probably seeing 8 to 10. In Iluka, if I look at it in that regard, properties that are around that mid to high twos. I think we had one in May and we saw about 36 groups through that one. Now, maybe I'm seeing 12.
And how many offers are coming out of those environments across both suburbs?
Well, we had one recently in Currambine, a good quality product. It was original, but it was immaculate, move-in ready. They had done a lot to it before putting it on the market. I had appraised that property back in December. To be honest, when I was opening that property, I was expecting we were going to be absolutely smashed on numbers. Good quality product, great location. Opened it about 4 weeks ago. First home open, we had 11 through. And I always believe in doing a second home open before we even look at any offers.
So do I, yeah.
So instead of just shutting it down straight away. We did the second home open. I had one group, which was very surprising.
And what date was this?
This was probably, I'm going to say, about 3 to 4 weeks ago.
Yep.
And out of that, we literally had one offer. Offer. It was a decent offer, but only one.
And how did that offer relate to the asking price and the expectations of what would have been a year ago, December, and now?
I think if I'd put that on even 6 months ago, I would have probably seen a figure close to around the 1.4 sort of mark. This ended up transacting around the 1.2s.
Okay. And how does that compare to what you would have expected a year ago for that product?
I think there would have been a lot more buyers looking at it 6 months ago. There'd be a lot more interest for that property. People would have been able to see the potential, even though it wasn't renovated, but it was completely move-in ready. Whereas now they've looked at it and they go, we need to renovate the kitchens, bathrooms. Even though we can just move in, we'll go and buy something else. And that's what I think we're finding at the moment. So that demand has completely lifted off, pulled back.
In terms of pricing, though, would that have been a good price in July 25? Would that have met expectations? Because we have obviously seen a blip there between the 1st of October, 5% scheme, rates being as pretty much low as they were in this cycle, all the way through the end of March. Everything sort of lifted 10-15% in that time. And then it seemed to have depressed back down, reset back down to pre-October 2025. The offer you got on this property, how would that have related to your expectations 12 months ago?
The offer that I got on my property now, I think it is probably still a little bit lower than what I thought I would have got. And I think purely not because of a price point, but because I think of the competition. I think the competition would have pushed that price up.
Got ya.
But at the moment, when you're having 1 or 2 offers, it's very different when you've got 6 or 7 buyers competing against the same property.
The number of offers you've got is the fuel, isn't it, for you to be able to do your work?
Absolutely.
It's the smoke and mirrors. It's not really to show the property. It's to turn that 1.2 into 1.3.
Correct. It's to create competition.
It's hard to do that when there's no competition.
100%.
And where do you think the weakness lies, if there is? Is there more weakness in Currambine? Is there more weakness in Iluka? Or is it segment-based in terms of the property within that suburb?
I think it's completely segment-based. I think transactions are still occurring, but buyer confidence is very low. And I think the only way that buyers are actually buying homes at the moment is if it's ticking all their boxes. With a very good quality product in Iluka, irrelevant of the price point, obviously it does have some relevance, but if it is in the high price point, but it is completely move-in ready and it's specced up, buyers are still buying it. Whereas you could show them something that is very well priced, but is not ticking all their boxes, and they're completely just skipping past it. They're coming through the home open.
It'll sit.
Correct. It's going to sit there.
And then the outcome is essentially price, right?
It is always coming down to price. It takes a little bit of adjustment, even for us as agents, I believe, that to look at it and go, I actually cannot justify that this is not selling at that price, given what else I've sold in the area. And then you start looking at when we've sold some of those, and even in the last few weeks, you go, well, it's slightly changed.
Last time we chatted, we were pretty surprised you were selling properties in the 2 millions in Iluka 2 years ago. What lofty heights have been reached over the last couple of years?
It's interesting because obviously when we were having that conversation before this, I looked at a property that I appraised in October 2024. And during that time, it's always a beautiful home. It still is. I put a figure of early to mid 2s on it because nothing was transacting around that sort of vicinity as much at that point. We've just sold that one in May this year.
So 18 months later?
18 months later. And in the high 2 millions.
Okay, and is that getting up to a record?
So there was one oceanfront that sold above the 3, but that high 2s now for good quality products became a norm a little while ago.
Is that a price that you think you still would achieve today in Q3 2026 versus May? Or do you think that's probably the peak of where it is and it may have come off a little bit?
It's a very interesting question because in relation to this property, so we had 4 offers on this home.
Clearly one of the best properties in the suburb.
Correct. So it was just immaculate, presented beautifully, great ocean views, had all the bells and whistles, great backyard, because Iluka doesn't have a lot of houses where it's got the pool and the lawn. This had both.
And the houses are massive. Right?
Correct. So it takes up most of the plot. So this had both on it. We had 4 offers on this property and all 3 of them were cash contracts. Now, the buyer that's bought the property, we are trying to work with them because they've had some situational changes to try and secure this home settlement. Hasn't gone through yet.
Yeah, wow.
Funnily enough, the other buyers that have missed out are still engaging.
Okay. Live event right now. Yeah.
Correct. So they're still engaging at a very similar level.
Yep.
And I've asked them the question, have you seen anything else that you've liked? No, we've seen others because I've noticed some houses that were on the market at that very similar time, they have not transacted and they've now dropped in price. And I've asked the buyer, have you looked at that one? And they've gone, yeah, but it's not suiting what we're looking for.
Okay.
And they're great homes.
So it's very much a horses for courses situation.
Correct.
I mean, Tom Mishak out of Queen's Park said a similar thing. It's segment-based. But his view on the segment-based, I guess, is where there is an involvement of investors or not. And Iluka has a very low investor base.
Yes.
But it does have a base of people who emigrate across from the East Coast. You made comment on that last time that you've had buyers, quite a few buyers that have come across the East Coast. Has that dried up?
Completely.
No more people moving across?
Very, very few. Or if they are, it's actually purely they're moving right now. Whereas before they were buying, renting it out, and then moving down in a few years.
Because they were obviously so worried about being able to get in.
Correct.
Yeah. So there's the more options, the more mobility, which we've all been asking for over the last few years. We've been screaming out for more mobility options. It's allowing people to now to make more live decisions.
Correct.
See, all of this data is really important for us as developers, investors, people listening to the podcast to get a live view on the ground of what's happening. I think what's happened is what you saw was a mechanical change, is what I'd like to call it, of when as interest rates started to rise again. You see that mechanical outcome of there still being interest, still being sentiment, still being FOMO of people feeling like they needed to buy a property, but being then limited by their serviceability. The banks, the rules of the game is making it harder. So that started to thin the herd. And that was a conversation I was having with top agents in the first half of the year, is that absolutely the FOMO is still there, the intent is still there, but there's just less people that can afford, so less people are rocking up, or at least putting offers in. Now it seems like the budget has not only been that mechanical kick in the nuts, but also the sentiment, the psychological side. And I think that's the real game changer here in the dynamic between demand and supply, is that despite there being less people that were able to afford these lofty heights of high 2 mils and Iluka, there was still intent, still people. Now people are gun shy.
100%.
As my mate Lockie Delahunty has said on another podcast, you don't want to be that guy catching the falling knife.
Yeah.
And risk-averse people are very concerned about that reality.
100%, which is why we're probably seeing a lot more subject to sales in the market.
Tell me about that. What's happening?
So before, with a lot of these homes, whether it's Iluka or Currambine, and because they were in such a competitive environment, a lot of buyers were quite confident in making subject to finance offers, putting a longer settlement and bridging, because they knew that they could put their house in the market in 2 or 3 weeks, and whatever figure that they were going to get was probably going to be more. Whereas now that's changed. So buyers are putting in offers, but they're putting it subject to the sale of their homes. Where we're getting stuck is they're putting in an offer, say, at week 1. Their house is going on the market in week 3. They're not getting a sale until week 6. But by that time, the market has shifted again. If they thought they were going to get 1.5 for their house, now they're potentially getting 1.3. That's now affecting them to be able to buy
the contract that they committed to.
Correct. So the amount of times in the last few weeks, I've had calls from other agents who I've got subject to sales with, look, we've got an offer, but it's not where the sellers need to be.
So what are you doing? What are your sellers doing? Are they pulling the contract, or are they facilitating it and getting extension?
I think it depends on the seller's situation. So I've had quite differences. Like with some of my sellers, I've always said, look, these are our options. This is what we can do. We can continue the way that we are going, obviously, but this is our strongest buyer. My recommendation is this: do we do some sort of adjustment to try and make a deal, because it's going to allow you to move forward? And a lot of the times, if my seller is purchasing something, then I will then take that on board to try and make the chain work on the other end. It's not a great conversation to have. It's never a great conversation, but I think if you don't have that great conversation now, you're going to be there in a few weeks and the sellers are not going to be sold, and they're going to be in a worse position than they are. I think it depends on the seller situation. And I think if there is a deal to be done for them to be able to move forward to the next chapter, then it is worth having that conversation and that adjustment.
Where do you think that the dynamic ends up at the end of this year before you go away on your Christmas holidays, Jas? What does it look like for you compared to now?
I think we're going to see a little bit more pain until the end of the year. I honestly do. I think it's going to go back to very much old school real estate, where before the buyers were throwing offers at us. Now it's going back to actually nurturing those buyers, finding out what they're looking for. And I've noticed that over the last few weeks, where it is going back to the point where if a buyer inspects a home in the first week, and when you do your follow-ups, they don't call you back, it doesn't mean that they're not interested. It's happened to me on a property over the weekend. This buyer, call it ghosting, I'm sure everyone else does as well, but he's ghosted us literally every time. He's been through the property 3 times, but he's ghosted us every single time. Every time he comes back, he's interested. I know that he's interested, but he's just not ready to make a commitment.
The FOMO's not there.
The FOMO's not there because he knows that he's got options. Now, we have already got a subject to sale offer on that property. Now, I have texted that buyer and said, look, we are still open to offers, but it is going to not be a subject to sale. That's now prompted him to reply to me. Now, this is the first time in a few weeks.
Buyers just not taking the market as seriously as
Correct.
they used to. It seems, and it's a very sell-sword situation, isn't it? You're either one side of it where it's absolute FOMO and people are yelling at you all the time and so unhappy
100%.
with you. And then the other way where all they wanted was you to give them a bit of time and love, and they don't even answer your call.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground, really, is there?
100%. Buyers were complaining before
no friends
that
in
the
real
agents...
estate.
Correct. Buyers used to say, the agent didn't call me back, didn't give me a chance to put in an offer. which I found ludicrous. But now they're not even answering their phones anymore.
Yeah, things have shifted definitely with regards to that dynamic, and I think there's a little bit of spite in it as well.
Correct.
It's been 5 years of buyers feeling like they're getting stuffed around, and there probably is a little bit of that vengeance going on at the negotiation table.
Absolutely.
I reckon we're going to see quite a few agents either go on holiday or pack it in.
Yes.
Because it means we're finally having to see agents do an honest day's work for the first time since COVID. And I reckon there's a lot who have jumped on board for the easy ride and don't know what an honest day's work looks like in terms of having to follow up buyers, nurture leads, nurture marketing, for example.
It's interesting to see because I've noticed on social media recently as well, before it was my feed was literally flooded with agents sold after the first home open, 7 offers.
Yeah.
That's completely dried up.
Exactly right. And it's not something that I'd ever be super proud of.
No.
Either. Didn't do a lot of work, made lots of money.
Yeah.
Next. It's like, you probably haven't got that muscle to learn how to actually make it work in times when it's going to take 3 weeks to sell a property.
Absolutely.
And what is that reality? Now that we're in that situation, you've got a dozen people coming through a home open, 2 people coming through a home open, 1 offer, 2 offers. How long is it taking to sell a home now? It used to be, a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Now it's taking probably, I'd say, around that 4 to 6 week mark. I think now it's crucial with your sellers to actually have very good communication, to actually do your feedback with your buyers. Because you know what? We might not like the feedback, but it is coming from the marketplace.
Yeah.
These are the buyers it's honest feedback. And I think that's one of those sort of things. And I've noticed that with my vendors as well. I've got a property on the market that's been on there for a little while. My sellers know exactly where everything's at. They understand what the market's doing. They're seeing it out there. They're going to look at home opens as well. They're seeing the numbers coming through their home open. They know that there's interest there, but it's not translating to offers. And this is where they go, what do we do? And I think you need to have a plan. Whereas I think everyone went through a stage where you could put any price on it, or you could just go, well, we'll probably end up getting more than what we think is no price.
Yeah.
But now those no price properties are literally getting less and less inquiries. And I've even noticed that everyone likes to test the market. No one knows where it's sitting. But the properties with price, they are getting
certainty, isn't it?
Correct.
That's the thing, is that when the buyers have a bit more of the prerogative, it's sort of like looking at a dating app where there's no photos. Why would you click on that person?
100%.
Or a Facebook page where it's a picture of their dog. I can't trust you.
Yes, exactly right.
Now I think is where things are going. We have to go back to the old school of setting ranges, setting genuine from prices, for example, and being honest about what we hope and expect for, and hoping someone agrees with you.
Absolutely.
Rather than just saying...
And you've got to be used to the buyer coming in under that price.
Exactly right. And negotiating.
Correct.
And taking a risk on sitting them for a week or two and hoping for someone else to come through. Doing a renovation, touching your property up, getting it sale ready.
And I think that's more important than ever. Because before, and I often say this in appraisals in the last few weeks, I said, look, probably 8 months ago, even though I never did, you could put a house in the market with a hole in the door and a buyer will go, that's fine, I'll deal with it. Now it's a wonky doorknob and they're going, oh, I'll just go and buy the other one down the road.
Yeah, I don't have to deal with this.
I actually had a buyer say to me last week, they came through a home and they said, oh, do you know if the sellers are going to fix those loose door handles? And I'm like, which one? And they brought me upstairs and it was in the powder room upstairs. And I was looking at it going, does it? And they're like, yeah, it's a bit shaky.
I've never had this conversation in 5 years.
Yeah.
It
actually blew me away.
But it's probably emblematic of where things are going to.
Yeah.
In a balanced market, there should be balanced dynamics.
Absolutely.
Staging.
Yes.
We've been a big fan of this podcast of staging for maximising your revenue. Is it now a downside risk mitigator, something that helps you get in front of that other property to try and get your property sold quicker?
I will get everything staged. So even if a client lives in the house, a partial stage is what I always do. I think it absolutely makes a huge difference and it kind of mitigates those buyers, any sort of flaws or negativity that they might see with a home. Before, when the market was hot, it was important because it was getting even better prices than what we thought. And now as the market's cooled off a little bit, I think it's more important to actually show the buyer the lifestyle that they could be living in.
Selling the dream.
Absolutely. Because not everyone can afford to change tiles and renovate a bathroom and a kitchen, but staging absorbs a lot of that. And buyers aren't silly. We're not covering up anything, but we're actually showing them, look, whilst you don't have the ability to do all this straight away, this is what it could look like.
Now, let's jump again to another segment of the market, investors. Not a huge part of your market in the first place, especially in Iluka, but what's the change in the pie graph of how many investors would be giving you a call and then buying a property if you had 10 people calling you in the space of a day? A year ago, how many were investors versus now?
5 or 6 were investors.
And what about now?
Probably 1.
Yep.
So last week we had an investor call. I think there are still some investors in the market, just a very different type of investor. I think the investor that is still looking at buying is the investor that's probably already got quite a good portfolio. They know what the market's going to do. It's a cycle. Whatever goes up comes down, vice versa. And they're looking for future. And that's what it is. Because we had one that we put on that would have been a great investment, but I knew that investor market was going to dry it up. Did he proceed? No. We ended up selling it to an owner-occupier instead.
Do you have any scavengers throwing super low ballers at you?
Yes.
Was that happening 5 months ago?
No. They weren't happening 5 months ago because...
You weren't taking the calls, probably.
When you were getting those calls, you had the ability to say to them at that point, look, interest is already
good
300
luck,
grand above. If you are still interested, this is where you would need to be. And they go, not interested. Now, the opportunists is what I call them, are calling and they're offering 300 grand lower. And you're going to them, look, I don't believe you're going to secure the home at that level.
Can I work with you though?
Well, happy to negotiate. And that's what I'm saying. Because I am obviously, like I said, I've got a lot of subject to sales at the moment with properties. And I've been dealing with other agents on the other side. And some of them haven't been in the industry for very long. And it's very easy to say no to a lower offer. And I'm saying to them, look, just ask the buyer. Is that a starting offer? Are they happy to negotiate? If they are, write it up. We have no idea where it's going to land and where the sellers are going to be able to negotiate to.
Where does the Iluka and Currambine market sit 12 months from now? Price, days on market?
The days on market are definitely going to be going up. Well, it's already started going up. I think we are going to see a little bit of a shift backwards. I'm thinking probably maybe about an 8 to 10% from the peak.
Have we not already seen a lot of those blip prices that jumped up in first quarter of this year already retract for the house next door?
We have, but the number of transactions have completely dropped.
So you think there's got to be some more... There's some more adjustment.
I think there is going to be a little bit more adjustment. Iluka has always been quite an interesting suburb because, like I said, if the property is excellent and it's just ticking all the boxes, people have a perception as to what they want in Iluka. If they're spending, they want the big, ostentatious home. If you can show them a house at high ones and is not as big, they still don't want to buy it. They would rather spend the two. So it's always been a very interesting suburb. But I think it's those houses that don't fit the mold of what that suburb is are the ones that are probably going to take a bit more of a hit.
Interesting. Yep. And I guess every suburb has their own vision of what the premium property
100%.
is. You know, a Cottesloe house is very different to a Mount Lawley house, very different to an Iluka house. And then you change the price point completely and you look at a downsizer option in Currambine. Does the downsizer market, by extension of that subject sale situation, get hit as well because Anna's selling for less in the big house in Iluka and therefore has less to spend in Currambine?
It definitely does. So I think when we were listening to our last thing, I was saying to you that the downsides of homes in Iluka on the smaller blocks, and that 400 square metre blocks, the very basic sort of builder's spec 3x2s were selling for 1.1 then. They're now selling for 1.4s. Unfortunately, that supply and demand aspect of that is still not in skew. There's still very little of that because we did have one recently and we ended up getting close to 1.6 on it.
So there you go, that's segmented again in that because there's so few options in that space and there are still people.
Yeah.
And I guess there's just enough fat between the big houses and the downsizers that they're just taking the bank account, but they've still got to pay what they've got to pay.
Correct. And we're finding that all the buyers that have sold, a few months ago, they just haven't found anything because some of the downsizers have got longer settlements. So they sold a few months ago, got a great price. So they're willing to actually still pay those dollars. It's the ones that I know that are trying to downsize now that is where we're going to find that issue. Even had a call with a buyer a few days ago. He lives in Iluka. I've appraised his house a few times and he said, where do you think it's going to sit? And they want to downsize, but they want to downsize in the same suburb. Now their house has probably pulled back a few $100 grand. Because of that, they're going, well, we can't now afford the 1.4. Do you reckon we'll be able to pick something up for 1.1?
And then you're on more Currambines.
Yeah, and exactly. And he goes, no, we don't want to be in Currambine, but I think the reality is potentially that's where we're going to have to look.
There's not many options for a first-term buyer, is there? I mean, Currambine has some, but has the 5% scheme had any impact on you guys?
Not really, because we were getting very different types of first homeowners in Currambine. They were still spending into the early ones and upwards of that, and they were happy to do work. It's those properties now that were the early ones in Currambine that needed a lot of work that is probably going to start seeing a bit of a blip. I actually had an interesting conversation with an investor who owns a property in Currambine. So he's had it on the market with another agency for, I think he said it was about 4 months or whatever. So it was rented.
That would be an outlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was on the market for quite a bit of time. It was currently tenanted. He was getting good rent on it. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms on a 80 block. He had an offer on it subject to the sale of another property in the high 9s. Now, the subject to sale didn't achieve what they wanted, so they didn't end up proceeding with the purchase. He obviously then adjusted his price and it went up to early to mid-9s, and he was still trying to get those buyers back, but those buyers that bought it decided they didn't want it anymore. Agency agreements ended. He's called me and he said, look, I've seen that you've sold the one around the corner. What do you think mine is going to get? Now I said, let me call you back in 24 hours so I can have a look and see what it is. I haven't been through the home. There was one around the corner that was a lot nicer, renovated. It was only had one bathroom, but had a pool. That sold for $920. His was completely original. So I said to him, look, I'm actually thinking now it's probably a high 8s. And he said, do you really think it is? And I said, potentially. And he said, do you have a buy for that? I don't want to go on the market. I put it out to the database because I've got a lot of buys. It's a great price point.
It's a rare price point.
We had one offer come back, sight unseen. Yeah, we'll offer them $720. Yeah. And I'm looking at it going, hang on. So I called them back and I said, just wanted to, yep, $720. Because that's what it's going to be like in 6 months, is what the buyer said to me. And I said to the guy, I said, look, I think you should just continue renting it out. And he's insisting that he wants to just take the money out because he wants to buy something else where he's from over east.
Yep.
You know, and he said, look, if someone will pay me mid-8s, that's the $130,000 drop from the offer that he initially accepted in a few weeks.
Yeah, it's 15%.
Yeah. You know, so this is what we're seeing. So I think some investors are trying to get out of the market. Some are just going to hold on. I'm saying to a lot of people, if you can afford to hold on to it, just hold on.
Yeah, well, look, I'd like to think personally, as I've said on this podcast before, and my job is to have opinions on these things, that this is a reset. It's not a trajectory. This is bringing us back somewhat to this time last year, and the direction of interest rates will, for the most part, determine the next direction on our price point, in addition to our continual inability to build for the people coming into the state. But it is interesting just how much of an impact sentiment, confidence is having up and down on those fundamentals of demand and supply, because the demand and supply space of what we're building for people coming in hasn't really improved. It's simply that I think the impact of rates, the impact of sentiment from the budget has essentially just thinned the herd on the amount of people that are buying property in this calendar year. But the one thing I don't know is where the trajectory will slow down in terms of the stock on market number, which has been increasing every week since the start of the year by an average of 150 properties a week. So my thoughts are, like every year, there will be a line drawn in the sand by about Christmas, but proof will be in the pudding, and then it will all go down to interest rates, because I think that's the one thing that can impact sentiment again after this budget to stem the bleed, if we want to call it that.
Yep.
But in the meantime, the top agents will keep playing their trade, and those guys that can't hack a honest day's work will probably make it easier for you to get a listing. We
have started noticing that with agents, and when sellers are getting appraisals and all of that as well. They're still getting appraisals, but the number of appraisals they're getting is lower to what it is. And I'm also seeing that the number of listings going on with out-of-area agents have decreased in the areas as well.
Selling agents are now focusing less on the upside opportunity and more on quality and protecting that downside with the top agents. And that's the only reason that you, Jay, for example, and many number ones would lose out, is because you've been, at the time, whatever it was in the last 6 years, realistic in your mind of what it can sell for, and it's taken an out-of-suburb agent to come in with a pie-in-the-sky number, and sometimes they get lucky.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's happened to me. Yeah. I've thought it's sitting here, someone else has got it, and they've sold it, and I'm like, wow. That's actually a fantastic price.
Yeah. Good on you.
Yeah.
And it's probably pushed a lot of top agents to themselves be ambitious about what they can achieve. But yeah, as markets start to become a little bit more risk averse, they do start to pull back to the tried, trusted and true agents that have been around with them for the last 10 years.
100%. And I think that honest conversation is going to be so important. Both markets were quite tricky to navigate in appraisals, because before, when the market was increasing at such a rate that you couldn't even keep up with, you were thinking it was sitting here, but by the time the house was going on the market in a few weeks, it could be a lot more.
The data just wasn't there.
Correct. And now it's recalibrating in a very different way, because you're using data that is historical.
Yep.
And now you're putting on the market and you go, look, this sold for there. I do believe your house is better than that, but yeah. I did sell that in Feb, and we're not in Feb anymore. You know, we're not even in March, we're not in May. This is where I think I'm going to be conservative and say this is where it is.
Jay, last question, like we always do, and I remember your answer last time. What's your favourite street?
In Iluka, still St James Approach.
Hasn't changed?
Hasn't changed.
A good street's always a good street?
Yes, always.
St James Approach in Iluka, if you're looking to buy in the suburb. And what about Currambine? We didn't ask you last time.
Currambine, I think there's a couple of actually good ones. I think my favourite street in Currambine would either be Lagrange Loop or Formby Lane. Those would be my two favourite streets.
Jdas, Noble Avenue, another number one of ours. Thanks so much for coming in, Matt. You
Thanks for
make
having
a
me,
big
Trent.
difference, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!